My name is Jonathan Haas, and Pastor Dixon has asked me to share some thoughts on Mother's Day. And as I was thinking about what to share, I was thinking of different mothers I had known in my own life and different biblical examples of mothers. And then I just felt impressed to go in a direction I wouldn't have thought, but I'm going to be in the book of Ruth talking about Naomi. And I'm going to be speaking on mothering for a lifetime. Naomi is an interesting Bible character because when we first meet her, she's in the midst of difficulty. She had evidently a good beginning in her life. Her name means pleasant, and we know that biblical names are very significant. So she evidently had a pleasant disposition, a pleasant personality. Her very name meant pleasant. And her husband's name, Ahimelech, meant my God is king. So it's a pleasant woman with a husband who was evidently raised the right way by parents who feared the Lord, and his name meant my God is king. It sounds like a good beginning, but very quickly we find in the first few verses of Ruth that they have trouble. If we look at Verse 1, it says, "It came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons." In the day of Judges, there were different periods where basically people would do whatever they wanted, and they'd get close to the Lord, but then they would get further from the Lord, and there would be judgment. So evidently this period of famine is one of these periods in the days of the Judges where God's people had gotten away. There's not an effective leader on the political scene that's leading the people to God. There's not an effective leader probably on the spiritual scene, at least not many that most of the people are listening to that are leading the people to the Lord. So it's a time where there's some difficulty in her surroundings, and then we see in her husband's decision to leave and the land of the Lord and to go to the land of Moab. That was a country that God had actually cursed, and they didn't have any business leaving the place that God had told them to be and going to Moab, but that's what her husband had chosen to do, and that's what their family does. And as we keep on reading in verse 3 of chapter 1, her husband actually dies, and she's left with her 2 sons. And the names of her 2 sons actually mean sick and pining. So just imagine having 2 sons. One of them's named Sick, the other one's named kind of Pining or Wasting Away. Not a very happy situation, but probably a very difficult pair of young men to be a mother to if one's sick and one's wasting away all the time. So as Naomi is in this time of difficulty, she's away from her friends that she grew up with. She's away from any extended family connections. She's in this place, and now with these 2 sons that aren't evidently healthy, not doing very well, and now her husband has actually died. And then, to make things even worse, in verse 4, it says, "And they took them wives of the women of Moab." So her sons, evidently, after the point her husband dies, for whatever reason, they decide to stay in Moab, and Naomi's there with them, and they actually marry Moabitess women. Now, God's children were told not to marry people of Moab, and they were told to only marry people of the children of Israel. So this has to be for somebody who has been raised in Israel and had been taught the law like Naomi. This has to be a sorrow to her heart. And eventually what we have a couple more verses down is her sons also die. So now she's in a strange land. Her husband has died. Both of her children, her children have died, both of her sons, and she is left in Moab with her daughter-in-law. So she's definitely having a lot of difficulty. And in this difficulty, we see that Naomi evidently enters a period of depression. Naomi, we actually see as she is preparing to return home, she tells her daughter-in-laws to leave. In verse 8, she says, "Go, return each to your mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me." So she appreciates their kindness, but she's basically saying, I don't have anything left for you here. It's time for you to go on. It's time for you to leave. And in the next few verses, she actually points out that, hey, I don't have any other sons. I can't provide you another husband. You need to go back to your people and get there. We can tell that this is a sense of depression because she's driving away the few people who are left to her. She admits her daughter-in-laws have been kind to her, but she's driving them away. Now, one of her 2 daughter-in-laws does leave, but the other one, of course, Ruth, who the book of Ruth is named after, chooses not to leave. And one of the most inspirational passages in the Bible is probably in Ruth chapter 1, where Ruth responds to her mother-in-law's repeated instruction to go home and leave. In verse 16, Ruth says, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and whither thou lodgest, I will lodge." Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord so do to me, more also, if aught but death part thee and me. So Ruth is giving this very inspirational address to her mother-in-law and saying, you know, I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to stick by you to the end. And not only am I going to stick by you, I'm going to choose to identify with your God. Now, the amazing thing to me is that shows that even though Naomi is in this period of depression, she's in this period where either, I don't know if it was, you know, entirely her and her husband had made this decision to go to Moab together, or if she was just kind of going along with his decision, or what the situation was, but she's in a place where she hasn't been in the right place spiritually. The people around her have made the wrong decisions. She's been isolated from friends, from family, from the things of the Lord, but yet she has enough of a Christian testimony that her daughter-in-law Ruth has realized that she's a Christian and actually chosen to the Lord because of what Naomi has done. So despite her depression, she is evidently, although she has probably not made all the right choices in this period of her life, she has definitely made enough right choices that she has a Christian testimony that causes her daughter-in-law Ruth to be drawn to the Lord. And that's an important thing to remember, that even when we're going through difficult times in our life, we can have the opportunity to still be strong in our faith and be consistent in what we believe, and to just put our trust in the Lord. And sometimes, even if we're not in the state of mind that we don't feel like we're accomplishing much, I'm sure Naomi didn't feel like she was accomplishing much during this period of her life where everything seemed to be going away. But yeah, this person, Ruth, is drawn to the Lord because of her testimony. As we continue looking in the book of Ruth, though Naomi is not over her depression yet, because in verse 18, the Bible says, and when she, meaning Naomi, saw that she, meaning Ruth, was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking to her. So instead of saying, oh, that's wonderful, Ruth, I'm so glad you're staying with me. Oh, that's wonderful, Ruth, I'm so glad you decided to trust in the Lord and make Him your God. She just kind of hushes. Sometimes that's a sign of depression. We get in such a state that we cannot even be positive when other people around us are giving us a reason to rejoice. And Naomi, for whatever reason, has, because of the hardship and the difficulty in her life, she's just in a state that even this good news that Ruth is choosing not to neglect her, she can't see the good of it, and she's just kind of in a depression, and almost it's like she's in a fog and can't see the good for the trouble that's coming. Now, as we continue on at the very end of chapter 1, when they get back to Bethlehem, some of her old friends greet her. And in verse 20, she responds to their greeting and says, "Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me." Naomi, as we said, meant pleasant. Mara actually means bitter. So she says, don't call me Naomi. That makes me think I'm pleasant. I'm not pleasant. I'm bitter, because I feel like the Lord's been very bitter to me. He's dealt very bitterly to me. So you can definitely tell that she is in a strong sense of depression during this period of her life. But the Lord, in His grace and in His mercy, brings Naomi through this and out of this into a period of deliverance. The difficulty does not stop her, although she goes through this period of depression. We see the rest of the book of Ruth is focused on the story of Ruth and Boaz, but we can see as Ruth and Boaz prosper, a lot of the reason that they prosper is because of the guidance of Naomi. First of all, the first source of her deliverance is that she begins to instruct Ruth. Ruth asked, basically, her mother-in-law at the beginning of the chapter and says, is it okay if I go out and glean in the fields and gather some food for us? And Naomi gives her permission, says, sure, that'll be great. And Ruth comes back with a good report of the gleaning that she has done in the field of Boaz, one of her kinsmen. And in the end of that chapter, in verse 20, Naomi tells Ruth, her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, the man is near of kin to us, one of our near kinsmen. So she is praising the Lord and saying, bless the Lord that He has continued to be a provider for me. Now, this is a major change of heart from somebody who just at the end of the previous chapter is saying, call me better, and not getting excited when her daughter-in-law, chooses to follow the Lord. Now she's giving the Lord credit and saying the Lord has not forgotten us. The Lord has taken care of us. So this just shows us that as we continue to go through our times of difficulty, and even if we get in a state of depression, if we continue to be faithful to the Lord will continue to bless us, and we just need to open our eyes and respond to the blessings He's given us and give Him the praise praise and the credit, because Naomi's whole attitude begins to change at this point. She tells Ruth at the end of chapter 2 and verse 22, she says, "It is good, my daughter, that thou go with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field." In other words, she wants Ruth to continue to stay close to Boaz. She feels like that Boaz might not only be able to provide bread for Ruth, but also might be able to provide in the way of becoming a husband for Ruth, as she was afraid that Ruth, if she came with her, wouldn't have a husband. But now she's beginning to realize, hey, I have a God who's bigger than I am. He's going to take care of things, and he's going to be able to provide for my daughter-in-law Ruth. And in chapter 3, verse 2, she says, "And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whom maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight at the threshing floor." And she continues to give Ruth instructions in verse 3. She tells her to wash herself, to anoint herself, to put on some perfume or some oil, and then to put raiment on her and go and meet Boaz. Ruth doesn't know the customs of the children of Israel, so the beginning of chapter 3, we won't take the time to read all the details right now, but she's basically instructing Ruth on the proper way to court a Jewish man, or a man of the tribe of Israel, because Ruth, being a Moabitess, is unaware of some of the customs here. So she instructs Ruth on where to glean. She instructs Ruth on how to approach Boaz. And then after Ruth comes back from Boaz, she gives the report that Boaz is going to go check on the possibility of him possibly marrying Ruth. So in verse 18 of chapter 3, then says she, meaning Naomi, "Sit still, my daughter," meaning Ruth, "until thou know how the matter will fall." So she tells Ruth a good piece of advice, said, you just need to sit still, you need to wait, you need to be patient, and just see what the Lord is going to do for you here. So we can see in her instruction of Ruth, it's actually helping Naomi's attitude to change. Sometimes the best thing we can do if we're in a period of depression is to just find somebody else who needs our help and seek to help them, and that gets our focus off of ourselves, and it helps our focus to become on other people. So in her service to her daughter-in-law, the Lord uses that to help provide both for the needs of her daughter-in-law Ruth, the need of Boaz for a wife, and the need of Naomi, because as we read chapter 4, it's a great celebration time. It begins with the story of Boaz coming with the happy news that he will be able to be Ruth's husband, and they're married, and by the end there's a little baby. So it's a very happy and joyful chapter in God's Word in Ruth 4. One thing I do want to point out toward the end, as part of Naomi's period of deliverance, is these women who she had told to call her bitter earlier. In verse 14 of chapter 4, she says, "And the women said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel." So now these women, they're saying, "Blessed be the Lord." Naomi blessed the Lord for Boaz. Now even her friends, those who knew her, are blessing the Lord for Boaz. And she is once again having a positive Christian testimony and an influence on the life of other people, because she has instructed Ruth in being patient, and now these people are seeing God's provision for her. Verse 15, they continue talking about Boaz, these other ladies. They say, "He shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, is better to thee than 7 sons hath borne him." This is talking about Boaz, and not only Boaz, but also his son Obed, that has been given, that the Lord has given to Boaz and Ruth. And they say, "Hey, Naomi, everybody was so sorry, so disappointed about you not having sons, but now you've got this wonderful daughter-in-law who's better than 7 sons." So they're rejoicing with Naomi and just in the Lord's provision. So this shows that deliverance does come to Naomi from the Lord through her willingness to make the best of what she has and to continue to instruct even when things look bad. I mean, she was a widow. She had lost all of her children. It would have been easy for Naomi just to kind of pack up and say, "Well, I quit. My role in life is over." But by focusing on her daughter-in-law and teaching her and helping her grow and develop, now she's blessed with this grandson. And we find in verse 16 that Naomi is able to take the child and lay it in her bosom and becomes a nurse to it. So she's able to tend for this young baby. And the name Obed actually means worshiper. So she goes from a place of bitterness to a place of deliverance where she is able to worship God. And actually her grandson is named worshiper, meaning that he is one that they are giving God the praise for, and one that they are going to train up to worship the Lord. Now, Naomi is just one of many women in the Bible that give a good example of this. Just want to point out a couple others and just to kind of connect these with some people I've known in my own life. I'm thankful for so many of the godly women that I've known. My own mother was definitely somebody who believed in instructing, and although she died before I was very far into adulthood, as I entered my older childhood and definitely my teen years, she taught me so many things about finances. She taught me about how to deal with people. She taught me how to respect the man of God. She taught me about how to handle things with school, how to handle things in a business environment, how to handle things with a job. So much of that teaching that I received from both of my parents, but also from my mother. And then as she died, my mother-in-law, I kind of picked up from where she left off. She did a great job showing me what it was to be as I became married, what it was to be a husband. She modeled a great relationship, her and her husband, on a godly relationship of the home. I learned a lot about dealing with people, caring for people, being humble, putting yourself out to help and serve others, just being willing to always extend yourself and be a blessing to other people. Learned a lot of that, and so many other people that we have seen. One person that's worth mentioning from the Bible is Lois, who was actually Timothy's grandmother. Paul is writing to Timothy and he says, the faith was first in Lois, it was first in your grandmother, then it was in Eunice, then it was in your mother, and now I know it's in you. That shows that the great impact that a grandmother can have on her grandchildren, that not only did her faith impact Eunice, but her daughter, but it also impacted Timothy, her grandson, which of course becomes a fellow missionary with Paul, and several books of the Bible were addressed to Timothy, and he was a pastor and a missionary in the early days of the church. Another godly woman who continued to serve the Lord throughout her life was Anna. We find that Anna was actually widowed at a very young age, probably even younger than Naomi. But after she was widowed, she stayed in the Lord's house. She would go to the Lord's house and worship. It reminds me of many of the godly women I've seen. They'll come to the Lord's house, they'll raise a bony hand, their smiles, they're greeting everybody. They'll just enjoy the fellowship of God's people, enjoy singing the songs of the faith. They'll sing in the congregation, they'll sing in the choir, they'll help in the nursery as long as they're possibly able. If there's a get-together or a funeral, they'll come, they'll bake a cake, they'll do whatever they can to be a help and a blessing. And we have Anna, who loved the Lord's house, and also said Anna served the Lord with fasting and prayer. We can think of godly mothers who have been prayer warriors and prayed for their family, prayed for other people, prayed for the church, prayed for our nation, and these godly women that have continued to serve the Lord throughout their life. And one last one from the Bible I want to mention is Dorcas, whose story is told in Acts 9. The people, after she died, come rushing to Peter, and they say, Peter, please come do something about this, because we love Dorcas so much. She's taken such good care of the widows. She's taking time to make garments and for the poor, and provide them for the people who need them. So it was a woman who would work with her hands, always, being willing to provide for the needs of other people, be an encouragement going and visiting other people. And I think of so many godly women who do every time they have a chance to use their hands, whether it's baking or tending to kids or sewing or knitting or whatever else it is, they just continue to work and do and use it to the Lord's blessing, because they want to be a blessing to everyone. And it's very important to realize that this world wants to give us the impression that, once a child turns, into their teenage years, they're about raised. But our children continue to need a godly influence and a godly witness throughout our life. The book of Titus says that women should teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. And as women have done this, the Lord has used it mightily through the church. He's used it mightily in Christian families, and it's been a godly influence. In closing, I want to quote the words of a poem that was set to music. It's actually set to the same tune of Faith of Our Fathers, but the poem is entitled Faith of Our Mothers, and it's written about 100 years ago, but it's still got a lot of good meaning about the godly influence that a good mother can have. It says, Faith of our mothers, living still, in cradle song and bedtime prayer, in nursery lore and fireside love, thy presence still pervades the air. Faith of our mother's living faith, we will be true to thee till death. Faith of our mother's guiding faith, for youthful longing, youthful doubt, how blurred our vision, blind our way, thy providential care without. Faith of our mother's guiding faith, we will be true to thee till death. Faith of our mother's Christian faith, in truth beyond our stumbling creed, still serve the home and save the church, and breathe thy spirit through our deeds. Faith of our mother's Christian faith, we will be true to thee till death. And as I have shared and thought on these thoughts of mothering for a lifetime, just want to encourage, every person to just continue serving the Lord throughout their life. And for those of us who have been blessed by godly mothers and grandmothers and other godly women in our lives, that we'll just remember what they've taught us and to continue to allow it to be a blessing to other people throughout our entire life.